what do we need right now and how do we mobilize the right teams to get together to drive that innovation and growth? You
Yeah.
can't do that if you're talking to people three times a year. It's just, you need to be a lot more agile than that. So being able to very quickly shift with this incredibly volatile business environment that we're having right now, I think is critical. I do like the notion, though, of infusing excitement about and exploration around AI in whether they're SWAT teams, whether it's, more of a cultural imperative like Doug's done here at Betterworks. I think giving people an opportunity to explore is going to really uncover the real opportunities. I think at this point, we're still so early in the game that we don't know what we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But creating an environment that people feel comfortable about exploring and being curious, I think is something we can all be doing right now.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and we're back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of them, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Jamie Aitken. Jamie is the VP of HR Transformation at Betterworks. She's on a few boards and she's also on the Forbes HR Council. She's got a book. Welcome, Jamie. It's great to have you again.
Thank you, Teri. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you were, and we were just talking about this. You were one of my early guests when I first started this show a few years ago, and you're one of my first repeats. So,
Oh,
um,
I feel honored. Thank you.
yeah, I'm excited to have you back on. I know we talked a lot then about performance enablement. We talked about the book that you and Doug wrote, some things like that. So lots of good stuff to talk about these days.
I agree.
Yeah. A few years ago, we kind of put out a challenge to HR to focus on being more strategic. And, we talked about what we were seeing in the data and what some of the indicators of, strategic HR functions were. One of the things we figured out was that for those organizations that were viewed as strategic, they had significantly better outcomes on the HR, the talent, and from the business perspective. It's really significant. And now, enter AI, right? And there's just a lot going on for HR and the
I
function
agree.
in general. But I was hoping today we could talk a little bit about strategic HR and AI and sort of where skills and performance enablement fit in here. Does
Yeah,
that sound like a
absolutely.
good plan?
Absolutely. And that's what everybody I'm talking to is talking about. So I think it's really relevant.
All right, then let's get into the huddle and start talking about it. So I know we had talked about, I think our first episode together, we did talk a lot about performance enablement and how was that different than, just performance management in general. But what's your take on the current state of like AI and its deployment? Because, and especially from an HR perspective, like we just went through the data. Like, we had 10,000 participants this year. We just looked at the data. We're getting ready to come out with it at HR Tech, but a lot of people are using ChatGPT. But when you start talking about what are you doing, what's embedded in your HR technology and what you're using, very little
Yep.
usage. Like it was surprising.
Yeah. And it's funny because I have the honor of talking to a lot of HR leaders. That's my job is finding out where are their biggest challenges. And when it comes to the topic of AI, there's sort of three buckets that HR leaders are talking about, which I find really interesting. The first is really just within the process, whatever the process is in HR, whether it's recruiting, whether it's learning, whether it's performance, it's all about how is AI improving the tools and helping our managers and our employees have a better experience? So there's that conversation that's happening, which is fantastic. But then there's this whole other group that's thinking, you know what? There's a big AI initiative going on in my organization, and I'm not even in the room. I'm not even part of the conversation about how we introduce this in a way that employees and managers are going to be comfortable and confident and curious. And I'll have a story about that because there is a third bucket. I might as well finish off, which is AI. To your point, AI is one piece of a very volatile, uncertain environment where it's one of many things that are coming at not only HR, but just the world, business,
Yeah.
right? And so how do you make sure that how you are aligning what you're doing in HR is going to link in with what the business is dealing with, as opposed to staying in our little HR bubbles and just focusing, on minding the process. And so there's like three different buckets, but the second one I think is really interesting because I think, early in my career, there was this small little practice that's was starting to bubble up in HR called change management. And it was relatively new because, at the time, I think it was a response to the fact that everybody was doing business process reengineering. And the success rate of adoption of what they were creating wasn't sticking as much as they thought it would. And change management was the piece that was missing. And I think that's where it really exploded, which is, oh, wait a minute. We haven't talked, we're not change ready. We don't have an enablement plan. We're not allaying folks' concerns. We're not making sure that our employees and our managers are comfortable with this new process that we're re-engineering. And so part of me sort of smiles a little bit because if I'm still hearing from HR leaders now that I'm not even in the room when we're talking about AI because they think of it as a technology project. So the CIO is running the project. It's like, but wait a minute, hold on. Don't we remember that it's a technology, yes, but change management, whether it's adoption, getting people engaged, getting them excited and enabled around it, is very much a part of how we make it a sustainable change in the organization. It can't not just be about the technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about the people not in the room, I'm curious, are you seeing HR leading or following in this whole planning and implementation of AI?
I think they are following. I'm not seeing them leading. And I think part of that, one of the things I have a lot of conversations about is this notion that HR needs to be really networked in with the CIO and the CFO these days, right? They need to be partnered with them as opposed to a consumer of what is coming to them from, an AI technology perspective. And so I think it's sort of an afterthought. I'm not seeing that HR is, in fact, one of the ones driving, but ultimately, in any implementation, you need HR to be the curator of the experience for the workforce, right? You need them to be in the room to help get people comfortable with whatever the change is going to be. And that could it could be AI, but it could be any of the big transformations that are going on. And we know, there's a lot of transformation happening, not just in AI, but
yeah, it's interesting. And change management obviously critically needs the C-suite support. Like they need sponsorship at that C level. But I almost see AI as like the C-suite needs to be running it, and all the people sitting on the C-suite need to have a significant role in how that gets. You can't. This is not a project manager. Like you can't hand this off to a project manager and say, "Run the AI implementation." Like
right.
it's just way beyond that.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I completely agree with you.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you're most excited about with respect to it, and what are you most worried about?
So I would say, as it relates specifically, because I live in the world of performance,
Yep.
so some of the things that I think have an immediate benefit are things like it's the fear of the blank page, right? If I'm a manager and I have to give feedback or I need to do some sort of interaction with all of my direct reports, wouldn't it be great if I had an AI assist that helps me think through based on, feedback that's happened throughout the year? How about if I have a summary of all that feedback as opposed to going through every little scrap of paper? How about if it's all in one place and I can look for trends? How
Yeah.
about above and beyond that? How can I look at my entire team and start seeing? So I think there's some really fundamental but boosts for managers to be better coaches and to be, frankly, a lot more efficient with their time, which I think is fantastic. But efficiency, it doesn't drive innovation, and it is an important element. But I get excited when I think about things like skills inference, for example, with all of the body of work as me as an employee, suddenly I have all of the recognition feedback, both from my manager, but also from my peers, from project managers on teams that I've worked with. All of that can start inferring skills. And then if you think about that at a company-wide level, do I start in HR do I start looking at how goals are being accomplished by teams and what is the makeup of skills in those teams that for that particular initiative makes innovation happen quicker? And then how do I match that with a similar type of initiative? So, I mean, it really then becomes a strategic HR exercise on top of things like helping managers become better coaches, which by the way is revolutionary in its own because we've
Yeah.
we've always wanted coach managers to become better coaches and talent managers, but frankly we haven't, I don't think, given them the support that they need in the moments that they need to have those conversations. So I
Yeah.
think at a whole bunch of different levels, it's fantastic. I think the thing I'm nervous about is that if and there are a lot of organizations that are still sort of a wait and see around AI. I think the challenge is people are going to be using ChatGPT anyway to do the work. And while that's, an acknowledgement that AI is here to stay, I would not want necessarily folks to be doing that in the wild, as they say, but rather, right, I would rather they be doing it in a place that, that data is safe.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we've got some exciting data that will be coming out next week at HR Tech. So I'm really excited about that. But one of the things that struck me about the information that we gathered, and this is probably a topic for another discussion, but there are still about 40% of organizations that are not using, and I'm going to say manager self-service, but sort of giving managers the tools and the capabilities to do some of these things. So there's a whole bunch of inefficiencies going on there, I feel like. And some of that's HR controlling the process, right?
Well, and this is, I think, part of the challenge is that, and we talked about earlier, there is a hunger and for business outcome conversations coming from HR more so than ever, particularly with the environment that we're in from a business perspective. There is hunger is a one word or a demand. Like it's definitely the volume is turning up on it.
Yeah.
And if HR continues to just focus on the process, and if it's a traditional performance, for example, then it's still a focus on did the process get completed? It's a check in the box kind of
Yeah.
exercise. If they still just focus on that and they don't start thinking about, wait a minute, how do I enrich the moments that actually matter? Like ultimately, what we're trying to do is get managers and employees working in concert together to remove challenges and to get things that are getting in the way of the employee out of the way, whether that's a developmental goal, whether that's business goal. If we're not focusing our energies and efforts there, and then answering the question from a business perspective that we're now driving faster goal completion, higher retention for high performers, and frankly, across the board, innovation speed, agility to adjust. If we're not focusing on that, and rather just very happy to say we have 100% completion of our PMP form at the end of the year, we're missing the boat in a big way.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting too, like the data plays this out. I think organizations that are viewed as or are seen as strategic HR functions have something like 34% higher business outcomes alone. So that's like profitability, innovation,
Yeah.
market share. You know, if HR is not humming along with the rest of the business, right? Because they're driving the resources and they're just a huge part of this whole AI thing, right? Because if
No,
we're going to be using resources in a different way, you know, HR's got to be in there. They've got to be leading.
well, and frankly, if I'm an HR person and I want to have introduce maybe a new program that requires resources or a new technology or both, and I'm walking into the C-suite and my business case is all about we need to change the process because people don't like the process, as opposed to talking in terms of this is how it's going to align with and drive your strategic objective for innovation and growth,
Yeah.
they're just not going to get the funding. So
Yeah.
so we need to get a lot better, a lot faster around that.
Yeah. Yeah. The last time we talked, and I still see this happening, like the whole performance management pendulum swinging, like where is it going to land, right? You know, where do you see that right now? And I know it's a lot around enablement, but where do you see that now? And what do you see as some of the other use cases? You talked about a few from an AI perspective where you see the use cases being strong, but are there some other things you're seeing? And are your clients really talking about the ROI of these things?
Yeah. And I think that's that. So we're still on track. Anybody that I'm talking to in HR is talking about moving to continuous feedback and more growth-oriented models. No question about it.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say that traditional performance management is done. Now, not that it doesn't still exist, but there is an appetite in a huge way, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But the expectation of the workforce now is I want feedback. I need to see personal professional growth. I need to see where I'm going in this organization. I need to have clarity on what I'm doing and how it's helping the business objectives. I need that connection.
Exactly. They need to
Right?
talk, like collaborate, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't that is definitely from what I'm seeing, those are the conversations I'm having 100% of the time. Nobody is saying we have a traditional performance management process where we kick it off at the beginning of the year. We have a mid-year discussion and an end-year appraisal. Nobody is saying that that's the way they want to stick to. Like that's
Yeah.
it's just not, it's not the fit. It's not modern. It's not in any way responsive to how people want to work now and how they want to connect at work. So yeah, that's what I would say about like where's the pendulum? It's not swinging back for sure. But you know, your other question was other use cases for AI. I think part of it, so driving efficiency, bolstering a manager's ability to give feedback, make it easy and efficient, yes. But then when you think about it, if Teri, you and I are talking throughout the year and we're having conversations and one-on-ones and I'm getting feedback from a whole bunch of places, that to me says suddenly we have a lot of meaningful data points, right? And what do you do with those data points? I talked about skills inference before. I think that is one that sets my heart on fire. I think that is an amazing piece of insight that, you know, if you look at it organizationally, could be incredibly helpful for strategic leaders, particularly if they're thinking about future-proofing their workforce and deciding by scenarios, how do we have the right people? Do we need to upskill? Do we need to hire different, all of that conversation? But even something as simple as calibration. If you can imagine a world where, with all of the data points that you and I have throughout the years of manager and employee, suddenly help place me somewhere from a calibration perspective, and that AI assists with that, as opposed to the traditional going into a room full of potentially bias and having that done.
Doing the 9 box.
Yeah, having it very subjectively pushed. Again, I think that's somewhere that could definitely help. But I think the future proofing of the workforce and workforce planning around that is a really interesting piece. And it's not even what are we scenario is 2 or 3 years. What about the organizations that suddenly a new market emerges and they need to have very specific project teams working on initiatives, innovations, whatever the case may be, being able to pull those teams together very quickly using a skills database based on the performance conversations that they've been having. Amazing, the possibilities there.
Yeah. There's a lot of work going on the skills side. I feel like that's another, it's not totally like AI, but there's a lot of sort of what do I do first? And what do we have to clean up to get there, right?
Yeah.
What are you seeing as some of the most common challenges there, from just sort of defining what those skills are? And then I assume by skills inference, you mean we can assume that if you can do these things, you're probably going to be able to do these other things, right?
Well,
Or learn these future skills.
It's both, because if I'm getting all sorts of feedback and recognition, again, not just from my manager, but across my peer set, from project leads that I've, worked on a project, if I'm getting all of that feedback in those conversations and I have the data points attached to that, then I don't necessarily need to have a secondary assessment. Those are now, by experience, these are inferred skills. Jamie, you're a great presenter. You knocked it out of the park. Suddenly that talks to my communication skills. But then, to your point, the secondary piece to it is you can also then infer that there's other skills associated that potentially are part of that profile that is mine, reflective of my body of work, not just based on one person's opinion, but rather the collective, if you will, which I think is really important too. It's not just top down what does my manager think of me? It's much more democratic than that, which I think is important as well.
Yeah. Well, and some of these skills, we may not know what they are yet. I mean, I think from an AI perspective, a lot of people are worried about the jobs that are going to go away. I'm thinking about all the jobs that are going to be created
exactly
as a result. And of course, we can put out a job description and see if we can find people, but the chances are we probably have people in our organization who can, move
solve
into,
absolutely,
solve these problems, right?
Yeah. Well, and so I think that's one of the barriers. I've worked in a lot of large enterprises where there were very complex competency profiles and competency models, multi-layered, super heavy, but it was a dream at the time in HR that we were able to, associate various competencies and the levels of those with a particular job role. I remember one large company I worked with, I went to the CEO and presented this, and he's like, "Are you crazy? I'm not putting my organization through that. That's way too heavy. Like, this, just no way." And I think there's an opportunity in that, if you make it more fluid, if you make it more in the moment, if you do it with, in concert with the ability of AI to, infer those skills, suddenly you're left with a much more organic and a much more fluid kind of framework, because those frameworks are really hard to pull together. They take a long time, they're expensive, and to your point, you may find yourself very much locked into a competency framework that will be irrelevant in 3 years.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be thinking, and it's hard because I was very proud of the fact that we had this we finally got this competency. We met the pinnacle.
Woo!
Yeah, exactly. And number one, the organization was like, no, we're not doing that. That's way, way, way too heavy. But two, it would have been a lot to ask the organization just in terms of, adopting it. And it could very easily be out of date, out of
Yeah.
sync in a very short period of time. So I
Yeah.
think those are the things, though. These are the investments. These are the efforts. This is the time and resources that HR needs to be thinking about how they can spend it more strategically in this very fluid environment.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. It's one of so a sneak peek again on the data, which I'm going to talk about next week because I'm doing the panel for women in tech on AI. But the top challenge for organizations and this data came from like the boards and the senior executives, was that they felt they had a lack of skills to deploy AI. So that's going to be an interesting component of this.
Just dig in. Just I don't want to wreck your panel, but like, what were they saying about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean this was just a question that we asked on the survey about what are the biggest challenges or what are the biggest barriers that you
Okay.
have to implementing AI in your organization. And then we broke it down by the level of person who was replying.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to see what different people thought, and down to the level of, somebody on the ground who said, well, it's not a priority,
Okay.
right?
Well,
Or they didn't know.
yeah, right. Well, we did a survey recently about linking business outcomes with talent strategy, and
Mhm.
there was we don't do that here, and there was also I don't know, which is telling. But I think we need to give a little bit of grace because I think there's still so many question marks in a lot of people's minds. That said, fostering like a curious mind about this, I think
Yeah.
is something that we in HR, as part of a cultural shift, we need to be encouraging for our organizations and just removing any of the fear associated with it. It's
Mhm.
like AI is not coming for your job, it's coming to your job. And so I think that's part of what we can be fostering is is a safe environment for folks, that they are not shivering in the corners, but rather they are curiously innovating and exploring themselves. I mean,
Yeah.
we do it here. I would say our CEO, Doug Dennerlein, is very bullish on AI, but he set an environment right from the top that said, I want you all to be exploring, not just our engineering team. I want everybody in this company to start exploring and be curious about AI and look for use cases.
Yeah.
And so on a regular basis, we meet at a company all hands, and he asks different parts of the organization to share how they've come up with a use case that's relevant to their function. And what that does is it sort of sets this tone of exploration and curiosity, but it also allows folks to get excited and comfortable with, oh, that's a good idea. So then they suddenly take that idea and they riff it in their own function. So it's really
Yeah.
become a cultural norm for us to talk about how we're using AI in terms of saving time or becoming more collaborative, whatever the case may be. And I think those are the sorts of things from a change perspective that HR should also be encouraging and fostering.
Yeah, championing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Back to your point about the complexity of the skills approach and framework, I think we have to be careful not to make this whole AI thing too complex.
Yeah.
And when I look at, what people are like, everybody's touching it in some way. Even if they're just using ChatGPT, like people are curious enough to go start to use that and think about how they make something in their current day to day, something go away that they hate to do, right?
Right.
I hate writing these, follow up emails or whatever it is, right? Or I hate writing this copy for social. So they've now got this partner. And I think that's the other thing is I like what you guys are doing because I think the more we bring our employees into that fold and say, help us figure out where are the points where we could really be taking advantage of this, I think the faster it's going to go rather than building this complex model and saying, okay, here's what you need to do.
Right.
That it's not going to work.
Well, and you need all of those various perspectives, right? Because somebody in accounting is going to have a completely different perspective on me in HR, thinking about how we can bolster what we're doing. How
Yeah,
can we improve it? How can we innovate? But learning from somebody in accounting and how they're innovating will potentially give me ideas of, oh, that's a really great idea. I think if I twisted that slightly, I could adjust it and put it into a use case that's relevant for what I do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then knowing those downstream impacts, like, yeah, I was working with a client a few months ago where I'm talking to payroll and asking them about the challenges in payroll. Everything's great. Everything works great. It's really good. Then I go out and I talk to the field, and the field is like, oh, yeah, we can't get information. We can't get access to this. We have trouble with time entry. All of these. So, it's that kind of thing too, like understanding what the downstream impacts of the work you're doing because there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, and we've talked, I think on our last time together, we talked about this too. HR needs to get out of their process bubbles. HR needs to get out of their silos. And that to me, what you just described is a perfect example of I'm in my bubble
Yeah,
and I run the process perfectly without understanding what the impact is on the field, right? So we need to be thinking as curators of an experience or curators of an outcome as
yeah,
opposed to this process is running smooth as silk.
yeah. And oh, by the way, the rest of all the other challenges that we have as organizations are not just going to disappear while we're trying to do this.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, life is good. Are you seeing anything different related to like learning and comp and sort of how performance is, integrating with those areas? Because obviously, those are two critical touch points and,
Yeah.
we need to think about how that's working.
Well, for sure comp because of, what if you look beyond calibration, of course, there's the linkage that moves over into comp. But if so pay for performance models are definitely a part of it. Benchmarking using AI would be another piece to it. Making sure that pay equity is happening. So I think there's a lot of different areas in comp. I think in learning, the idea of skills inference that I mentioned, but then personalizing learning pathways and goals to help that person, almost like a Netflix. We recommend these things. I think all of that is going to be huge. But then you get into things like talent mobility, internal mobility, succession, the idea that AI could be removing bias in a sometimes very subjective process, removing bias, but also uncovering gems in our organization that we didn't even think of.
Yeah,
I think all of those are very exciting, but you need to be thinking strategically in HR to see that. I'm also excited about this notion of, HR processes and all those bubbles just disappearing so that we're actually sharing data across all of these and gaining way more insights associated with the entire body of work or employee experience or manager experience than we've had in the past. So I think there's a really exciting things for HR to be getting excited about. But we need to, finally let go of this notion that we're driving a process and that we're compliance. We need to be pushing into the conversations that we're not in right now,
yeah,
because we are the people in the organization that's going to be the most focused on how is this impacting and how is this uplifting the employees and managers in our company.
yeah, yeah. I mean, clearly, innovation to me is one of the biggest things that organizations are focused on and can come out of improving productivity and changing the way we work. And I think that one, you just talked about it. Like these are the things that collaborating across the organization, this is how we actually create innovation,
Yeah.
not just internally, but how we get things out to customers and how we work with the customers. Are you seeing any particular big bets that organizations are making from an AI perspective, or, are you guys making some big bets in that area?
So I think, and we sort of touched on it a bit, but the whole, I think one of the most obvious ones for me is strategic workforce planning. And when I say that, again, it's not just 3 years out, 2 years out. It's even what do we need right now, and how do we mobilize the right teams to get together to drive that innovation and growth? You
Yeah.
can't do that if you're talking to people 3 times a year. It's just, you need to be a lot more agile than that. So being able to very quickly shift with this incredibly volatile business environment that we're having right now, I think is critical. I do like the notion, though, of infusing excitement about and exploration around AI in whether they're SWAT teams, whether it's, more of a cultural imperative like Doug's done here at Betterworks. I think giving people an opportunity to explore is going to really uncover the real opportunities. I think at this point, we're still so early in the game that we don't know what we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But creating an environment that people feel comfortable about exploring and being curious, I think is something we can all be doing right now.
Yeah, 100%. Before I ask you my last question, I was looking at some stuff on your website today. What is this People Fundamentals webinar series that you guys have? I was very curious about that and thought our audience might be interested in that.
Yeah, so it's a series that's been going on for a couple of years now, and it's this notion that, at the end of the day, what are the fundamental things that you need to be focused on as an HR leader? And it's very much, I mean, the topics change from month to month. We bring in amazing speakers for this, but it's really about what are the things that we absolutely have to get right as HR people, and very much focused on people-centric practices. So there might be a topic around change management. There might be another one around getting people comfortable as coaches from a manager perspective. That it's a wide-ranging and it's very popular. We get an awful lot of folks coming to these. I would
Yeah.
highly encourage the People Fundamentals. And there's an awful lot of the previous sessions that are on our website and available so that you can go and stream them.
Yeah, I was out there checking out because Stacy and Cliff just did one for you
Yeah.
guys. And so I was kind of checking that out and I was like, oh, there's a whole series. This seems like it'd be I mean, the topics were fantastic. So I
Yeah.
think people could really benefit from that. Well, so what's one thing that you could leave the audience with today that would help them in this journey around AI from your perspective, and especially from a performance perspective? Because I know that, people, that's obviously becoming more critical because performance is such a key part of whether we get what we want out of this whole, AI transformation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, performance touches everything from feedback, learning the goals, the business goals that you're working on,
Yeah.
recognition, all of those pieces. So if you're still thinking traditional performance management, you need to expand your view on that. I'm saying in general, obviously. But
Yeah.
I think back to like the three different topics that I'm having with HR people, which is, the idea that, I'm curious about what AI can do in terms of the tools that I use in a process versus I'm curious about how I get involved in the conversations that we're having from an AI perspective for our organization. And I'm also curious about how this plus all the other things that are going on is affecting the transformation that I need to, as an HR person, be a part of in a very big way. So, number one, I would say unleash yourself from the idea that you are a process owner. Like, I just unleash yourself from that idea and start thinking of yourself as a designer of experiences and a curator of those experiences and somebody who's driven by data and make sure that you're grounding everything that you do in business outcomes, not just HR wish list,
Right.
because otherwise you're just not going to be in the room where you need to be.
I love that. We're going to have to make that the in flashing lights on the promo for this. Love it. Well, this has been fantastic. I always, as you know, love talking to you. You and I spent some time together in a past life and
We
had a
did.
lot of fun. So I'm going to miss you at HR Tech next week. But if you're listening to this episode and you're going to be at HR Tech, love to see you there. I'll be doing the closing keynote for the Women in Tech. And Stacy will spill all the tea on this year's Voice of the Customer results. So I can't wait for that. Also, be sure to catch Stacy and Cliff next week on while they spill the tea on HR Tech. Actually, we'll probably do a special episode while we're at HR Tech. So you
Oh,
guys,
cool.
if you don't get to go, you'll get to hear all the exciting stuff that happened there.
Well, and I'd be remiss without saying, if you're at the Gartner London or Gartner Orlando event, catch me. I'll be speaking there. It is the season, Teri. It is
I
conference
know.
season.
I know. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for joining me. Great conversation. Where can people find you online and also find your book?
Actually, that's a really good point. I can make sure that you get a link that people can order a free book delivered to them. So I'll make sure to send that to you.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's Jamie Aitken on LinkedIn. Easy to find.
perfect. Easy, easy. All right. I also want to thank our producers, Method Media Group, Kelly and her team, our marketing team, Kendall and Summer. And I want to thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you like the episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review or drop us a line on the website. Let us know what you want to hear about because we really like to focus these conversations on things that are really challenging you and you want to hear from other people and what they're doing on them. So let us know. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.